She just wanted to rest for a moment. But the millionaire saw something rare in her. His words silenced the room and opened up a new destiny. And what began with a seat turned into an impossible love. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Your gesture supports our work and inspires us to continue telling stories like this. The December morning was starting warm in London. The sun was already beating down hard on the mirrored windows of the corporate building in Canary Wharf, reflecting golden light onto the concrete and glass that formed the city's financial heart. Inside the office on the 23rd floor, Raphael Alistair observed the street activity below, the cars lined up, the hurried people, each carrying their own dreams and ambitions. He had been there for almost 20 years, ever since he founded Alistair Tech Solutions, a company that started small and transformed into one of the country's largest technology consultancies. Raphael was 42 years old, with dark hair beginning to show silver strands at his temples, brown eyes that rarely displayed emotion, and a posture that conveyed absolute control. He was known in the market as a relentless strategist, someone who never showed weakness, who made difficult decisions without hesitation, and who built an empire based on pure rationality. His employees respected him, his competitors feared him, and his partners admired him. But Raphael knew something was missing, something that money couldn't buy and contracts couldn't guarantee: true loyalty. In recent months, an idea had taken hold of his mind, a controversial, risky, perhaps even cruel idea. But he needed to know. He needed to understand who was truly by his side by choice and who was only there for the benefits. For years he had been surrounded by flatterers, people who smiled in his presence and disappeared when he wasn't looking. He knew his fortune attracted interest, not affection. His position generated respect, not love. And that bothered him more than he would ever admit aloud. The decision was made on a sleepless night. Raphael would simulate the bankruptcy of his own company. It wouldn't be a real bankruptcy, but it would be convincing enough for everyone to believe. He would plan every detail, spread rumors, forge documents, create a complete narrative of financial collapse. And then he would observe who would stay, who would disappear, who would show their true colors. It was a social experiment. It was a test of character. It was, perhaps, the most dangerous thing he had ever done. That December morning, he began to put the plan into action. He called his personal lawyer and instructed the creation of documents suggesting federal investigations into tax irregularities. He activated contacts in the financial press to leak information that Alistair Tech was facing serious problems. He cancelled Millionaire contracts with important clients, claiming inability to meet deadlines. He simulated tense meetings with fictitious auditors, everything meticulously calculated to create the perfect illusion. The first person to notice the change was Clara Sterling. Clara was 28 years old and had worked as Raphael's executive assistant for 4 years. She was the kind of person who went unnoticed in a crowded room, not because she was common, but because she preferred discretion. Her brown hair was always tied in a simple bun, her green eyes carried a silent attentiveness, and her clothes were always sober, elegant without drawing attention. Clara was methodical, organized, and incredibly dedicated. She knew Raphael's schedule better than he did, anticipated his needs before he expressed them, and worked. Long hours without ever complaining. But no one truly saw her. To the executives, she was just the assistant. To the partners, she was just another employee. Even for Raphael, for a long time, Clara had been merely part of the structure, an efficient cog in the company's machinery. He had never stopped to truly get to know her. That morning, Clara arrived at the office at 7 o'clock, as always. She prepared Raphael's coffee, reviewed his agenda, and organized the documents he would need for the day's meetings. But when he entered the room, she noticed something different. There was a tension in the air, a strange energy she couldn't identify. Raphael was quieter than usual, more distant. During the morning, she began to notice strange movements, muffled phone calls, last-minute cancelled meetings, whispered conversations among directors. And then, in the late afternoon, the bomb exploded. The news leaked in the financial press. A specialized portal published an article with the title, "Alistair Tech Faces Unprecedented Crisis and May be on the Brink of Collapse." The article cited anonymous sources, mentioned ongoing investigations, and speculated about cash flow problems. Within minutes, the news spread. The company's shares, which were traded on the stock exchange, plummeted. The reception phone didn't stop ringing. Investors demanded explanations. Clients threatened to break contracts. Clara watched it all with a mixture of confusion and concern. She tried to speak with Raphael, but he was locked in his office, taking calls and refusing visits. For the first time in 4 years, she felt like she was being left out, that something very serious was happening, and she didn't have enough information to understand. In the following days, the situation drastically worsened. Raphael called a meeting with all directors and announced that the company was facing a federal audit and that accounting irregularities from previous years had been discovered. He spoke with a grave, almost defeated expression, something no one had ever seen in him. He said he would try to resolve the situation, but that he couldn't guarantee anything, that everyone should prepare for the worst. The reaction was immediate: panic, despair, betrayal. The first to leave was Richard Thorne, financial director and one of the minority partners. He entered Raphael's office with a face red with anger, threw a folder on the table and said he wasn't going to sink with a ship without a captain. He accused Raphael of having hidden information, of having put everyone at risk, of having destroyed everything they had built together. Raphael listened in silence, without defending himself, just nodding. Richard stormed out, and 2 days later, his resignation letter was on the table. After him, it was Marianne Croft's turn, operations director. She was known for her fierce loyalty and for having worked side by side with Raphael since the company's early years. But when the news intensified and rumors about lawsuits began to circulate, Marianne also disappeared. She didn't say anything personally. She simply sent a formal email, communicating her immediate departure and citing personal reasons. One by one, the executives abandoned ship. Some sought Raphael to give explanations, others simply disappeared. The meeting rooms, once always occupied, became empty. The corridors, which used to be full of lively conversations, now echoed silence. The company that seemed invincible was disintegrating like a sandcastle under the tide. Clara observed everything with a growing ache in her chest. She saw people who swore friendship and fidelity abandoning Raphael without looking back. She saw false smiles being replaced by cold silences. And, for the first time, she wondered if she was seeing true human nature. But the worst was yet to come. Raphael didn't just simulate the corporate crisis. He also spread rumors about his personal life. He leaked information that he was facing serious financial problems, that he had made bad investments, that he was being sued by creditors. Gradually, his image as a successful magnate was replaced by that of a ruined man. And with that, his personal relationships began to crumble. His younger brother, Graham, who had always been financially dependent and whom Raphael generously supported, disappeared completely. He stopped answering calls, blocked messages, vanished as if they had never been family. Raphael tried to contact him a few times, but gave up when he realized the call wasn't even connecting. Longtime friends, those who frequented his house on weekends, who drank his imported wine and laughed at his jokes, vanished in the same way. Invitations were no longer accepted. Messages went unanswered. It was as if Raphael had become invisible. The woman he had been casually dating for a few months, a successful lawyer named Felicity, ended the relationship by text message. She said she wasn't prepared to deal with financial problems and needed to focus on her own career. She didn't even bother to have a face-to-face conversation. Raphael absorbed all this with a neutral expression, but inside, something was breaking. He expected this reaction, planned for it to happen, but it still hurt. It hurt to discover that years of relationships were so fragile, that the loyalty he thought he had earned was, in fact, just disguised interest. But while everyone left, one person remained. Clara. She continued to arrive at the office every day, always at the same time. She prepared Raphael's coffee, organized his documents, answered the few phone calls that still came in, and maintained the routine as if nothing had changed. When other employees began to hand in their resignations, Clara remained. When the cleaning staff stopped showing up and the corridors became dirty, she herself picked up a cloth and cleaned Raphael's office. When the coffee stock ran out and there was no more budget to replenish it, she brought some from home. Raphael observed it all with a complex mix of surprise and discomfort. He had planned this experiment, but he hadn't thought about how he would feel seeing someone stay. And Clara didn't just stay, she cared. She truly cared. One afternoon he finally asked. He was sitting in his chair looking out the window when Clara entered to place some documents on the table. He turned and looked directly at her. "Why are you still here, Clara?" She seemed surprised by the question. For a moment she was silent, as if searching for the right words. Then she replied in a calm, firm voice. "Because you are still here, Mr. Alistair." Raphael frowned. "I don't understand. You know the company might close, that I might not be able to pay your salary, that there's no guaranteed future. Why don't you look for another job?" Clara gave a small smile, one of those sad smiles that carry more meaning than 1,000 words. "Because I don't work here just for the salary. I work because I believe in what you built, and because I know that bad things don't define who we are. They just test us." Raphael was speechless. He turned his face back to the window, feeling a tightness in his chest that he couldn't name. Clara left the room in silence, leaving him alone with his thoughts. That night, Raphael returned to his apartment in Kensington. The place was large, modern, with a spectacular view of the illuminated city, but it was empty. No one was waiting for him. There were no voices, no laughter, no company. Just the echo of his own footsteps on the cold marble. He poured himself a whiskey and sat on the sofa, reflecting on everything that had happened in recent days. The experiment was working. It was revealing exactly what he wanted to know, but the truth was hurting much more than he imagined. Meanwhile, Clara arrived at her small apartment in Hackney. It was a simple but cozy place. She had lived alone since breaking up with Julian 2 years ago. Julian had been her first love, the man with whom she planned to build a life. But he left her when he received a job offer abroad, saying she didn't fit into his future plans. Clara spent months trying to recover, and it was precisely during that period that she got the job at Alistair Tech. Working for Raphael had been her salvation, not because she was in love with him or because she sought something beyond the professional, but because that job gave her purpose when she felt lost. It gave her structure when her life was crumbling, and somehow it taught her that she was stronger than she imagined. Now, seeing Raphael face such a devastating crisis, Clara felt a strange connection. It was as if she understood what it was to lose everything, what it was to be abandoned. And because of that, she couldn't just leave. She couldn't be just another person who would disappear when things got difficult. But her friends didn't understand. They called constantly, saying that Clara was being naive, that she was clinging to a sinking ship, that she needed to think of herself and find another job before it was too late. Clara listened patiently, but didn't change her mind. One night, her best friend, Beatrice, came to her apartment to have a serious conversation. They sat in the small kitchen, drinking tea, while Beatrice tried to convince her. "Clara, you need to understand that he's a rich businessman. He'll recover, he'll find a solution, he'll rebuild everything. But you? What will happen to you if you stay until the end and lose everything?" Clara stirred her tea slowly, watching the steam rise from the cup. "I don't. No, I really don't know. But I just know I can't abandon him now, not when everyone else already has." Beatrice sighed, shaking her head. "You've always been like this, always put others before yourself. But eventually you'll get hurt, and I don't want to see that happen." Clara smiled weakly. "I know, but I need to do what I feel is right, and right now, the right thing is to stay." In the following days, the situation at the company worsened even further. The media began to cover the Alistair Tech crisis with more intensity. Reports spoke of possible bankruptcy, investigations, the collapse of an empire. Social media buzzed with malicious comments. People who once admired Raphael now openly criticized him, saying he had defrauded investors, that he was a fraud. The company building, which was once always full, now had only 2 occupied floors. The reception was empty, the meeting rooms dark, the computers turned off. It was like walking through an abandoned set, a ghost of what was once a prosperous empire. And amidst all this, Clara and Raphael continued, she maintaining her routine with an almost stubborn dedication, he feigning collapse while observing everyone's behavior around him. But the more time passed, the more uncomfortable Raphael felt with his own experiment. He began to question his motivations. Was he doing this to discover the truth, or just to confirm his own insecurities? Was he testing the loyalty of others, or just punishing himself for not believing that someone could truly care about him? The questions echoed in his mind during sleepless nights. And then, one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Albert Maxwell appeared. Albert was a 72-year-old man, owner of a business consulting firm, and Raphael's mentor since his early years in the market. It was Albert who taught Raphael the fundamentals of business, who gave him his first opportunity, who believed in him when no one else did. Raphael considered him almost a father, and Albert always treated him like a son, but they hadn't spoken for almost a year, not because of fights or disagreements, but simply because life had taken them on different paths. Raphael was always too busy. Albert was preparing for retirement. Time passed, and the distance grew. When Albert appeared in Raphael's office that afternoon, it was like seeing a ghost from the past. He was thinner, with completely white hair, but his eyes still held that sparkle of intelligence and wisdom that Raphael had always admired. Raphael immediately stood up, surprised. "Albert, what are you doing here?" Albert entered the room with firm steps, closed the door behind him, and faced Raphael with a serious expression. "I came because I heard the rumors. I came because I read the news. And I came because I know you're too smart to let an entire company collapse without a reason." Raphael felt a chill down his spine. "What do you mean?" Albert approached, placing his hands on the table. "I mean, I know you, Raphael. I've known you since you were in your 20s and showed up at my company asking for a chance. I know when you're truly in crisis, and I know when you're playing chess. And right now, you're playing. The question is, why?" Raphael looked away, unable to meet Albert's penetrating gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." Albert gave a short, humorless laugh. "Don't lie to me, boy. I've seen too many people in my life not to recognize a game when I see one. You're testing people, aren't you? You're simulating a bankruptcy to see who stays and who leaves." Raphael took a deep breath, feeling the defenses he had built begin to crack. "And if I am? What's the problem with that?" "The problem is you're playing with people's lives, with their trust, with their loyalty. And that's not brilliance, Raphael, that's cowardice." The words hit Raphael like a punch to the gut. "Cowardice? I just want to know who truly cares about me." Albert shook his head slowly. "No, you don't. You want to confirm that no one cares. You want an excuse not to trust people. You want to protect yourself from the possibility of being truly loved." Raphael felt the words penetrate deep, deeper than he wanted to admit. He remained silent for a long moment, fighting against the emotions that were beginning to surface. "You don't understand what it's like to live surrounded by falsehood, by people who only want something from you, who disappear when you can no longer give anything." Albert sighed and pulled up a chair, sitting down slowly. "I understand more than you imagine. I've spent my life building companies, doing business, meeting people. And yes, many people are false. Many disappear when things get difficult, but some remain. And when you manipulate a situation to force a test of loyalty, you destroy the possibility of knowing who would truly stay by their own choice." Raphael sat back down, feeling the weight of Albert's words. "But I need to know." "No, you need to trust. Trust is a risk. It's making yourself vulnerable. It's accepting that you might get hurt. But without risk, there's no true reward. And what you're doing now, Raphael, isn't courageous. It's fear disguised as strategy." The two remained silent for a long time. The city noise outside seemed distant, almost unreal. Raphael felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. All the certainties he had, all the justifications he had built in his mind, began to crumble. Albert stood up, placing a hand on Raphael's shoulder. Think carefully about what you're doing, because when this charade ends, you'll have to deal with the consequences, and some of them might be irreversible." And with that, Albert left the room, leaving Raphael alone with a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. That night, Raphael couldn't sleep. Albert's words echoed in his mind like a scratched record. Cowardice. Fear disguised as strategy. Was it true? Was he just protecting himself from being truly known? And then he thought of Clara. Clara, who kept coming every day, who remained even when there was no logical reason for it, who cared, who worried, who believed. Was he about to lose the only person who truly stayed? The discomfort Raphael had felt since the beginning of the experiment turned into something deeper: remorse, guilt. And for the first time, he wondered if he had gone too far. But it was too late to turn back now. The experiment was already in motion. The consequences were already unfolding, and Raphael had no idea how it would all end. Meanwhile, Clara was in her apartment, sitting on the sofa, looking at a blank sheet of paper. She had started to write a resignation letter. The words came out difficult, heavy, painful. She wrote about how she valued the opportunity, about how much she had learned, about how she needed to move on. But when she reached the end, when she was about to sign, something stopped her. A memory. A phrase Raphael had once said, almost in passing, but which remained, etched in her mind. It was a regular day. They were reviewing a contract, and he paused for a moment and said, "You know, Clara, people always want to work with winners, but true character shows when you work with someone who is losing." Clara looked at the letter, at the words she had written, and then slowly she tore the paper, tore it into small pieces until nothing was left, and as the pieces fell into the trash, she made a decision. She wasn't leaving. No matter what happened, she was staying, because some bonds are not based on logic. They are not based on profit or loss. They are based on something deeper, something that cannot always be explained with words. And as the December night covered London with its dark mantle, two people in different places made decisions that would change their lives forever. Raphael realizing that his experiment was revealing more about himself than about others, and Clara deciding that some ships are worth staying on even when they seem to be sinking. Christmas was approaching, and with it, an emotional storm that neither of them was prepared to face. The second week of December brought with it an even heavier atmosphere to the Alistair Tech building. The Christmas decorations that would normally adorn the corridors were not put up. The year-end parties that were a tradition at the company were cancelled. The silence that was once merely uncomfortable was now suffocating. It was as if the building itself was mourning something that had not yet completely died, but was slowly agonizing. Raphael continued to execute his plan with surgical precision. More false documents were produced, suggesting that the Inland Revenue had blocked the company's bank accounts. Rumors of asset seizures began to circulate. He called a meeting with the few remaining employees and announced, with a tired voice he didn't even have to fake, that next month's salaries might be delayed. The news dropped like a bomb. The next morning, 10 more employees handed in their resignations. Analysts, developers, administrative staff, all with varied excuses, but with the same look of self-preservation. Raphael accepted each letter with a nod, without trying to convince anyone to stay. He observed each reaction, each justification, each face that averted his gaze, and he mentally noted who these people were who had once sworn loyalty to the company. The Human Resources Department, which once had 6 people, now had only the coordinator, Joanna, and she too was clearly considering her departure. Raphael could see in her eyes the conflict between duty and fear. She hadn't handed in her resignation yet, but she was already updating her resume, he was sure. During these difficult days, Clara became not only Raphael's assistant, but practically his only active employee. She took on tasks that weren't hers, answered phones from entire departments, organized documents from areas she barely knew. She worked from 7 in the morning to 8 at night, sometimes even later, and always with that serene calm that seemed to defy the chaos around her. Raphael observed all this with a complex mixture of feelings. On one hand, he was impressed by her dedication. On the other, he felt increasingly guilty. He knew that Clara was sacrificing her time, her energy, perhaps even her health, for a cause that wasn't even real. And that awareness weighed on him like an anchor. One afternoon, as Clara organized files in his office, Raphael finally broke the professional silence they maintained. "Clara, can I ask you a personal question?" She looked up from the documents, surprised. "Of course, Mr. Alistair. Why aren't you scared? Everyone who works here is terrified of the possibility of losing their job, their salary. But you act as if none of this affects you. Why?" Clara was silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then she replied with an honesty that caught Raphael by surprise. "I am afraid, yes, very afraid. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about what will happen if the company really closes. I think about the bills I have to pay, the rent, the responsibilities. But I've learned one thing in recent years, Mr. Alistair. I've learned that fear only paralyzes us if we let it, and that sometimes the right thing to do is not the safest thing." Raphael leaned his head, genuinely interested. "What do you mean?" Clara placed the documents on the table and sat in the chair opposite him, something she rarely did. "When I was 26, I was in a relationship that seemed perfect. I thought I was going to get married, have children, build a life. But then he got a job offer abroad and told me I didn't fit into his plans, that he needed to grow and I would hold him back. I was devastated. I spent months thinking the problem was me, that I wasn't enough." She paused, her eyes shining with the memory of old pain. "But then I realized something. The problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that he never really saw me. He saw what I could do for him, how I could serve his plans, but he never bothered to truly know me. And I spent years molding myself to be what he wanted, instead of being who I was." Raphael listened in silence, realizing he was truly getting to know Clara for the first time, after 4 years of working together. "When I got the job here, I was completely lost. I didn't know who I was, what I wanted, what my worth was. But working for you taught me something important. It taught me that I am capable, that I can face challenges, that I don't need external validation to know my worth. And that's why I'm not leaving now. Not because I think I'll gain something from it, but because I finally learned to make decisions based on what I believe is right, not on what is easiest or safest." Raphael was speechless for a long moment. He had created that experiment to test the loyalty of others, but he didn't expect to find someone with such genuine depth, with such silent strength. He found himself respecting Clara in a completely new way. "You are an extraordinary person, Clara, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that." Clara smiled, a shy but sincere smile. "Thank you, Mr. Alistair. That means a lot." She returned to the documents, and Raphael stayed there watching her work, feeling something change within him. The experiment was revealing truths, but not the ones he expected. In the following days, the pressure increased even further. The press published a new article, this time mentioning that creditors were filing debt enforcement requests. The news was completely false, fabricated by Raphael through his contacts. But it had the desired effect. The market reacted with renewed panic. Competitors began making hostile offers to buy the company's assets for ridiculously low values. Former employees gave interviews talking about internal problems that, according to them, had always existed but were hidden. And with each new piece of news, more people disappeared from Raphael's life. His cousin Marcus, with whom he grew up and considered almost a brother, stopped answering messages. His ex-wife, with whom he maintained a cordial relationship despite the divorce 5 years earlier, called only to say that he shouldn't count on her for anything. Friends from the gym, from clubs, from dinners, all evaporated like mist under the sun. But perhaps the most painful disappointment was with Patricia Davies, his partner since the company's early days. Patricia was brilliant, strategic, and Raphael had always considered her someone he could trust completely. They had built Alistair Tech together, shared victories and defeats, faced real crises in the past. Raphael was absolutely certain that if anyone would stay by his side, it would be her. But he was wrong. Patricia appeared in the office on a gloomy afternoon with a hard expression Raphael had never seen on her. She wasted no time with preambles. I came to inform you that I am withdrawing from the partnership. My lawyers are already preparing the documents. I want you to sign the transfer of my shares at nominal value, considering the company is worth nothing anymore. Raphael felt like he had been punched. Patricia, it doesn't have to be this way. We can talk, find a solution. She shook her head firmly. There's nothing to talk about, Raphael. You hid serious information from me. You put me at risk. You destroyed everything we built. I cannot and will not sync with you. But we've been partners for 15 years. Doesn't that count for anything? Patricia gripped her purse tightly, her knuckles white. It did, in the past. But you showed that I cannot trust you. And without trust, there is no partnership. She left without looking back, leaving Raphael alone in his office, feeling a deep pain in his chest. That wasn't just part of the experiment. It was real. Her reaction was real. And it hurt in a way he hadn't predicted. Clara was in the next room and heard the entire conversation. When Patricia left, she hesitated for a moment, then entered Raphael's office. He was standing, looking out the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. Mr. Alistair? He didn't turn. Yes, Clara. Do you want me to prepare any documents? Call anyone? Raphael shook his head slowly. No, there's nothing to do. She made her decision. Clara took a step forward, hesitant. May I say something? You may. She took a deep breath. People act out of fear, and when they're afraid, they don't always make the best decisions. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're human. Raphael finally turned to face her. Are you defending me or defending her? Clara smiled slightly. I'm just saying that not everything is black and white, that sometimes people disappoint us not because they don't care, but because they have their own demons to face. Raphael observed Clara for a long moment. Have you always been like this? So understanding of others? Flaws? She shrugged. No, I used to be much tougher, but life taught me that harsh judgment usually comes from those who have never faced the same temptations. Raphael felt something stir within him, a deep admiration for the woman standing before him, a woman he had seen every day for 4 years but who somehow he had never truly seen until now. Thank you, Clara. She nodded and left the room, leaving Raphael with his thoughts. That night, Raphael made a decision. He would go through with the experiment, but afterward, when it was all over, he would have to deal with the consequences, and he would have to find a way to redeem himself, especially with Clara. The 3rd week of December brought the peak of the simulated collapse. The building was now practically empty. Only 3 floors still had some lights on. The reception was abandoned. The decorative plants were wilting from lack of water. The elevators made a strange noise from lack of maintenance. It was like walking through a post-apocalyptic landscape. Raphael and Clara were, in practice, the only 2 regular occupants of the building. Even Joanna, the HR coordinator, had handed in her resignation the previous week, unable to bear the pressure. They were alone in an empire that once housed over 200 employees. Their routine, however, didn't change much. Clara continued to arrive early, prepare coffee, organize what still needed organizing. Raphael continued to pretend to make calls, pretend to negotiate solutions, pretend to fight for something that was never truly in danger. But with each passing day, the lie weighed more heavily on his shoulders. On one of those mornings, Clara arrived earlier than usual. She had spent the night awake thinking about why she was doing this, thinking if it was sanity or madness to stay, thinking about what would happen when inevitably it all ended. She prepared coffee, as always, and brought a cup to Raphael. He was in his office, looking at fake documents he himself had created. When Clara entered, he looked up and for the first time she saw something different there. Tiredness, regret, humanity. Good morning, Mr. Alistair. Good morning, Clara. Thank you for the coffee. She placed the cup on the table and stood there for a moment as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Is something wrong? Raphael asked, noticing her hesitation. Clara took a deep breath. May I ask a question I perhaps don't have the right to ask? You may. What happened to you? What changed for everything to collapse so quickly? Raphael felt the question like a sharp blade. He had two options: continue lying or share a little of the truth. He chose a middle ground. Sometimes, Clara, we build things so big, so complex, that we forget to build solid foundations, and when the storm comes, everything collapses. I think that's what happened to me. Clara nodded slowly. And what will you do now? Raphael looked at her with an intensity that made her blush slightly. Honestly, I don't know. But I do know that when all this is over, I will have learned something important. I will have learned who truly matters. Clara held his gaze for a moment, feeling something change between them. A silent connection, unspoken, but deeply felt. Then she nodded and left the room, leaving Raphael with a strange feeling in his chest. The days sped towards Christmas with frightening rapidity. The streets of London filled with decorations, colourful lights, decorated trees. Shops played Christmas music. People shopped frantically. The festive spirit took over the city. But inside the Alistair Tech building, it was as if Christmas didn't exist. There was only silence, gloom, and two human beings trying to find meaning amidst the chaos. On Christmas Eve, Clara arrived at the office knowing it would probably be the last day before the holiday. She had prepared something special. She brought a small plastic Christmas tree, one of those cheap department store ones, and placed it in the reception area. She decorated it with some ornaments she had at home. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture of hope amidst the desolation. When Raphael arrived and saw the tree, he stopped. He stood there, looking at those blinking lights, at the simple ornaments, at that humble attempt to bring a little joy to a place that seemed to have lost all light. And something inside him broke. He went up to his office and closed the door. He sat in his chair, and for the first time since the experiment began, he cried. He cried for the loneliness he himself had created. He cried for the people he had lost. He cried for the manipulation he had carried out. He cried for having become the kind of person who plays with others' feelings in the name of truth. And he cried for Clara, for that extraordinary woman who remained when everyone else left, who brought a Christmas tree to an empty building, who still believed it was worth trying. He cried until he had no more tears. When he finally composed himself, it was mid-afternoon. He wiped his face, straightened his tie, and went down to speak with Clara. She was in the file room organizing documents that probably no one would ever read again. "Clara," she turned, and something in his face made her stop immediately. "Yes, Mr. Alistair? I want to ask you a favor, a personal favor." "Of course. What do you need?" Raphael hesitated, the words caught in his throat. "Today is Christmas Eve. Do you have plans?" Clara shook her head. "No. My family lives in Manchester. I was going to travel, but with everything that's happening, I preferred to stay here. As a precaution." Raphael nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "Would you like to have dinner with me right here in the office? Nothing elaborate. I just don't want to spend this night alone." Clara was surprised. The question was so unexpected, so vulnerable, so human. She saw in him not the powerful businessman, not the distant boss, but just a tired, lonely man. And her heart was moved. "I'd love to, Mr. Alistair." Raphael smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "Thank you. And please stop calling me Mr. Alistair. Call me Raphael." Clara smiled back. "All right, Raphael." They spent the rest of the afternoon working, but there was something different in the air, a lightness that hadn't existed before, a closeness that was beginning to form. When night fell and the city lights began to turn on, Raphael and Clara met in the main meeting room. Clara had brought simple food, sandwiches she bought at a nearby bakery, soda, some fruit. Nothing luxurious, nothing that resembled the business dinners that used to happen in that building. But it was sincere. It was real. They sat facing each other, the large table now seeming small in the proximity they shared. They ate in silence for a few minutes, until Raphael broke the quiet. "Clara, can I tell you something? Something I perhaps shouldn't." She looked up, curious. "You can." Raphael took a deep breath. "I never had a real family. My parents separated when I was a child. My mother moved abroad and practically disappeared from my life. My father remarried and had other children, and I was always the child from the previous marriage, the reminder of a mistake. I grew up feeling invisible, unloved, only useful. Clara listened in silence, seeing a side of Raphael she had never imagined existed. When I built this company, I thought I was building something that would give me value, that would make me seen. But deep down, I always knew that people were here for what I could give, not for who I was, and that gnawed at me from within. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked gently. Raphael looked at her with moving intensity. "Because you are the only person who stayed, and I need you to know that that means everything to me, more than you can imagine." Clara felt her eyes well up. "I didn't stay expecting recognition, Raphael. I stayed because it was the right thing to do." "I know, and that's exactly why it's so important. You didn't stay out of obligation or interest. You stayed out of character. And that's rare, rarer than anything money can buy." They remained silent, just looking at each other, a deep connection forming there, in that empty room, on that solitary Christmas night. Then Clara spoke, her voice soft but firm. "May I confess something too?" "You may." "I'm not perfect, Raphael. I'm scared. Very scared. I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm not being naive, if I won't regret it, but I choose to stay anyway because I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Raphael felt a deep admiration for her. Clara Sterling, the assistant he barely noticed before, was revealing herself to be one of the bravest people he had ever known. "You are extraordinary, Clara." She smiled, wiping away a tear that escaped. "You are too, Raphael, even if you don't believe it." They continued talking through the night. They shared stories, fears, dreams, regrets, laughing sometimes, crying others. It was as if in that moment all professional barriers, all hierarchies, all masks had fallen. They were just two, human beings, vulnerable and honest, finding solace in each other. It was already dawn when Clara finally admitted to being tired. Raphael prepared an improvised sofa for her to sleep on, using cushions and a blanket he found in a cupboard. She accepted, grateful, and within minutes she was asleep, emotionally and physically exhausted. Raphael, however, couldn't sleep. He sat in his chair, watching Clara sleep peacefully, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. True gratitude for having someone who cared. And along with the gratitude came overwhelming guilt. Guilt for having used her in his experiment. For having deceived her. For having put her in a situation of emotional vulnerability based on a lie. He made a decision that morning. When everything was over, when the truth came out, he would do whatever it took to redeem himself with Clara, even if she hated him, even if she never forgave him. He would try. At dawn, Raphael brewed fresh coffee and left it beside the sofa where Clara slept. He wrote a simple note. "Thank you for staying. Merry Christmas." And then he left the building, leaving her to sleep. He needed air, he needed to think. He needed to decide whether to continue with the experiment, or if it was time to end that charade before it caused more damage. The streets of London were empty that Christmas morning. The whole city seemed to be sleeping, resting from the frenzy of the previous days. Raphael walked aimlessly, hands in his pockets, his mind turbulent. He thought of Albert and his words about cowardice. He thought of Clara and her unwavering loyalty. He thought of all the people who abandoned him and wondered if they were wrong to protect themselves or if he was wrong to test them. And then, amidst his reflections, he realized something fundamental. The experiment wasn't testing the loyalty of others. It was testing his own capacity to trust, and he was failing miserably. Raphael returned to the building hours later. Clara had already woken up and was sitting at the reception next to the small Christmas tree, drinking the coffee he had prepared. When she saw him enter, she smiled. "Good morning. Merry Christmas?" Raphael smiled back, but there was a sadness in his eyes that Clara couldn't decipher. "Merry Christmas, Clara. Where did you go?" "Just walking, thinking." Clara nodded, not pressing. "Do you want fresh coffee? This one's already cold." Yes, thank you. As she got up to prepare new coffee, Raphael watched her, and he made a decision. Soon, very soon, he would reveal everything. He would end the experiment, he would tell the truth, and then he would find out if the bond that was forming between them was strong enough to survive the betrayal. Because that's what it was, he knew. It wasn't just a test, it was a betrayal of the trust of everyone who stayed, especially Clara. And that awareness was almost unbearable, but for now at that moment, on that Christmas morning, he allowed himself to simply be present, to be with the only person who remained when everyone else left, because even if for a short time it felt like redemption, even if he knew the storm was just beginning. The days after Christmas seemed to drag on at a strange pace, as if time had lost its linearity. The Alistair Tech building remained almost empty, a ghost of what it once represented. Raphael and Clara continued their solitary routine, but something had changed between them. Their Christmas Eve conversation had removed layers of formality that existed before. Now when they spoke, there was a silent intimacy, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Raphael began to notice small details about Clara that had previously gone unnoticed. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way she always organized the pens on her desk in color order, how she hummed old songs softly while filing documents. These were small things, irrelevant perhaps, but they revealed a real three-dimensional person, full of nuances he had never bothered to get to know. Clara, in turn, was also seeing Raphael with new eyes. The man who once seemed a distant, almost mythological figure in his authority, now showed very human vulnerabilities. She saw him tired, defeated, fighting internal demons that he tried to hide, but that were visible to anyone who truly looked. And Clara looked. She had always looked, but now she allowed herself to see. One morning, a few days after Christmas, Raphael arrived at the office and found Clara in the small kitchen on the floor, making coffee. She was wearing a light blue blouse and her hair was loose for the first time he could remember. She was different, more relaxed, more herself. "Good morning," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She turned and smiled. "Good morning, Raphael. Coffee's almost ready." He entered the kitchen, something he rarely did. "Can I help you?" Clara laughed lightly. "You? Helping to make coffee? I think the world has truly turned upside down." Raphael smiled, one of those rare, genuine expressions that seemed to transform his face. "Maybe it's time I learned to do things for myself, to depend less on others." Clara watched him carefully. "There's nothing wrong with accepting help, Raphael. We are social beings. We need each other. But there's a difference between needing and depending to feel valid." Clara nodded slowly, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "That's true. But you are already valid, with or without a business empire." Raphael took the cup she offered, his fingers lightly brushing hers. The touch was brief, but both felt an electric current pass between them. A moment suspended in time, charged with something unsaid, but deeply felt. "Thank you, Clara, for everything." She held his gaze for a moment, too long to be casual, too short to be definitive. "You're welcome." They drank coffee in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but sharing the same space in a new, more intimate way. That afternoon, while Raphael was in his office trying to concentrate on documents that no longer made sense, his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was familiar and unwelcome. "Raphael?" "It's me, Graham." Raphael felt a mixture of anger and pain, hearing the voice of the brother who had completely abandoned him in recent weeks. "What do you want, Graham?" There was a pause. "Look, I know things haven't been great between us, but I heard the company's situation is complicated." Complicated is a delicate way of putting it. "Yeah. Well, I just wanted to tell you that if you need anything, you can count on me." Raphael almost laughed at the irony. "Funny you say that now. Where were you these past 3 weeks when I really needed you?" Graham hesitated. "I was processing, man. It was a lot of information at once. I didn't know how to handle it." So you chose not to handle it. You chose to disappear. It wasn't like that, I just needed time. Raphael felt the anger, simmering. Time. You had 4 whole weeks, but now that you've heard some rumor that maybe things aren't as bad as they seem, you show up. For what, Graham? To ensure you can still access my bank account? There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. It's not like that. No, then how is it? Explain it to me. Graham took a deep breath. Look, I know I was a coward. I know I should have stayed. But I panicked. I've always depended on you for everything. And when it seemed like you were going to lose everything, I just didn't know who I was without your money. Raphael felt the painful sincerity in his brother's words. They weren't excuses, they were confessions. And somehow that made it all worse. I understand, Graham. But understanding doesn't change what happened. You showed me who you really are when things got difficult. And that's a lesson I won't forget. Raphael, please. No. You made your choice. Now live with it. And he hung up. He sat there, looking at the phone in his hand, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction for finally having said what he thought. Sadness for confirming what he had always suspected, but never wanted to believe, that his own brother only saw him as a source of resources. That night, as Raphael and Clara worked side by side organizing files that probably no one would ever need again, she noticed he was particularly quiet. Did something happen? She asked gently. Raphael hesitated, then decided to share. My brother called today. Clara raised her eyebrows. And it was exactly as I imagined. He disappeared when things were bad. Now that maybe they're not so bad, he reappears. How do you feel about that? Raphael stopped organizing the papers and looked at her, disappointed but not surprised. I think deep down I always knew our relationship was conditional. Clara placed her hand on his arm, a simple gesture but loaded with empathy. I'm sorry, Raphael, no one should go through that, especially not with family. Raphael looked at her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth through his shirt sleeve. Thank you. It's comforting to know that at least one person understands. I understand more than you imagine. They remained like that for a moment, connected by that simple but meaningful touch. Then Clara slowly withdrew her hand, a slight blush rising on her cheeks. Sorry, I didn't mean to be intrusive. You weren't. You were kind. Raphael paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret staying? Not leaving when everyone else did? Clara thought for a long moment before answering. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm being crazy. If I'm not throwing away opportunities out of loyalty to something that might not have salvation. But then I remember that life isn't just about making safe choices. It's about making choices that you can look at in the mirror and be proud of, and I'm proud that I stayed. Raphael felt something tighten in his chest. Guilt, admiration, love. He couldn't name it. You are an incredible person, Clara. I don't know what I did to deserve your loyalty, but I'm grateful for it. Clara smiled, that soft smile that seemed to light up the room. You don't have to do anything to deserve it, Raphael. That's what you still haven't understood. True loyalty is not something you buy or conquer. It's something freely offered. Raphael fell silent, absorbing her words. In his chest, guilt grew like a storm. She was there offering genuine loyalty, and he was repaying her with lies. The weight of the betrayal he was committing became more unbearable each day. That night, after Clara left, Raphael stayed alone in the office. He sat in his chair, turned to face the night view of London through the window, and made a definitive decision. It was time to end the experiment. It was time to reveal the truth. He could no longer continue deceiving Clara. He could no longer abuse her trust, but how? How to tell her that it was all a charade, that the collapse was fake, that he tested her, manipulated her, used her? How to look into her eyes and admit that the wonderful loyalty she showed was met with calculated betrayal? Raphael spent the entire night awake, planning, writing and rewriting in his mind what he would say, imagining all possible reactions, and fearing above all the hatred he would see in her eyes when the truth came out. The next day, Raphael decided he would tell her everything. He arrived at the office early, even before Clara, and made coffee. He rehearsed the words 1,000 times. He was ready, or at least he thought he was. When Clara arrived, he called her into his office with a seriousness that worried her. "Raphael, what happened? Is something wrong?" He gestured for her to sit down. "Please, Clara, sit down. I need to tell you something important." Clara sat down slowly, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes attentive. "I'm listening." Raphael opened his mouth to begin, but at that exact moment, his phone rang. It was his lawyer with an urgent matter about one of the fake documents that was causing a real problem. Raphael had to answer. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, Clara had been called to resolve a problem at reception. The moment passed. Raphael tried to create another opportunity during the day, but there was always something. A call, a problem, an interruption. It was as if the universe was conspiring to keep him in the lie, or perhaps it was just his own cowardice finding excuses. In the following days, Raphael continued trying to find the right moment to reveal the truth. But the longer he waited, the harder it became. The relationship between him and Clara was deepening in ways he hadn't anticipated. Long conversations during lunch, shared laughter over small things, comfortable silences that spoke more than words. And with each moment of closeness, Raphael's guilt grew. One afternoon, Albert Maxwell appeared again, this time unannounced. He entered Raphael's office with the same authority as always and closed the door behind him. "I came to see if you've come to your senses yet," Raphael sighed. "Albert, I already know what you're going to say." "Then you already know you need to end this charade before it causes irreversible damage." Raphael leaned back in his chair, tired. "I know. I was about to tell Clara everything, but I couldn't find the right moment." Albert scoffed. "Right moment? There's no right moment to confess a betrayal, Raphael. There's only the moment you stop being a coward and face the consequences of your actions. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I sleep well at night knowing what I'm doing? No, I think you're in a hell of guilt, and you think you deserve to be." Albert sat down. "But let me tell you something, boy. You have two options. Now, either you tell the truth and risk losing Clara but keep a shred of integrity, or you keep lying, she finds out by other means, and you lose her anyway besides becoming the worst version of yourself." Raphael knew Albert was right. "I'll tell her. Today." Albert nodded. "Good. Because that young woman out there deserves the truth. She deserves more than you're giving her." After Albert left, Raphael sat for long minutes, gathering courage. Then he stood up and went to look for Clara. He found her in the file room, as always, organizing papers. "Clara, I need to talk to you. It's important." She looked up, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Of course, what is it?" But before he could begin, the reception phone began to ring insistently. It was an important client, one of the few who still kept in touch, wanting to discuss an urgent contract. Raphael had to answer. The conversation took hours. When it finally ended, it was already night. Clara was still there, waiting patiently. "Sorry, Clara. It was longer than I expected. About what I wanted to talk about." She smiled tiredly. "You can leave it for tomorrow, Raphael." "It's late and we're both exhausted." "No, I need to— tomorrow," she insisted gently. "Some important conversations deserve us to be rested to have them." Raphael hesitated, but eventually agreed. She was right. But tomorrow never seemed to arrive. Another week passed. The new year came and went almost unnoticed. The Alistair Tech building continued its state of suspension, as if existing outside real time. And Raphael continued to postpone the confession he needed to make. But the universe has a way of forcing revelations we try to avoid. It was a January afternoon, the summer heat making the air conditioning struggle to maintain a pleasant temperature, when Clara was organizing old documents in a file room on the 18th floor. A room that was rarely used. She found a forgotten box at the back of a cupboard, dusty and marked with a date from 3 months ago. Curious, she opened the box. Inside were financial documents, reports, contracts. But something didn't add up. The numbers didn't match the crisis narrative that was being told. There were records of recent transactions, active accounts, solid investments, all dated after the supposed start of the collapse. Clara frowned, confused. She picked up more. Documents. She found printed emails, conversations between Raphael and his lawyer, discussing the creation of fake documents, strategies to simulate a crisis, detailed plans of the experiment. Her heart began to beat faster. It couldn't be. It couldn't be what it seemed to be. She continued reading, each word a dagger, and then she found a memo from Raphael to himself, dated a few weeks ago, detailing the objectives of the experiment: to test loyalty, to identify true allies, to manipulate the situation to reveal people's character. Clara felt the world spin around her. Her hands trembled, holding the papers. Her stomach churned. Tears began to stream from her eyes before she could even fully process what she was reading. It was all a lie. It was all a charade. The collapse, the crisis, the fear. It had all been an elaborate staging, and she, like a fool, had stayed. She had sacrificed her time, her energy, her emotions. She had worried, cared, remained for a lie. She sat on the floor of the file room, the documents scattered around her, and cried. She cried for having been deceived. She cried for having trusted. She cried for the sharp pain of betrayal. And she cried because deep down a part of her had begun to feel something for Raphael, something that went beyond the professional, something that was now being destroyed piece by piece. How long she stayed there, Clara couldn't say. It could have been minutes or hours, but when she finally stopped crying, when the tears dried, leaving only salty trails on her face, she felt something different. It was no longer pain. It was anger, a cold, controlled, but deep anger. She gathered some of the most revealing documents, put them in a folder, wiped her face as best she could, and went down to Raphael's office. She knocked on the door hard, not waiting for an answer before entering. Raphael looked up, surprised by her abrupt entry. "Clara, what?" But the words died in his throat when he saw the expression on her face, and the documents in her hand. "When were you going to tell me?" Clara asked, her voice eerily calm. "When were you going to have the decency to tell me I was an idiot? That everything I did, everything I felt, everything I sacrificed was for a lie?" Raphael stood up immediately, his heart pounding. "Clara, I can explain." She threw the folder onto his desk, the documents scattering. "Then explain. Explain why you played with my life, why you used me in your psychological game, why you let me worry, sacrifice, care when it was all just a test. I was going to tell you. I tried to tell you several times. But you never did you?" Clara felt new tears threatening to fall, but she didn't let them. "You saw me every day. You saw me stay when everyone else left. You saw me worry about you. And you said nothing. You just kept lying." "It wasn't like that. I started the experiment for reasons that made sense at the time. But later, after you stayed, after I truly got to know you, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I was going to tell you, Clara, I swear I was. But you didn't." She shook her head, incredulous. "I trusted you, Raphael. I believed in you, and you betrayed me in the worst possible way. You betrayed my trust, my loyalty, my feelings. I know, and I'm sorry, more than you can imagine." "You're sorry?" Clara laughed without humor. "You're sorry? That doesn't change anything, Raphael. That doesn't erase what you did. You are exactly the kind of person I've always avoided. The kind who manipulates, who uses others for their own ends, who doesn't care who they hurt in the process." "That's not true. I care very much, especially about you." "No, you don't care. Because if you cared, you would have told me the truth. You would have given me the choice to stay knowing what was really happening. But you took that choice away from me. You turned me into a puppet in your private play." Raphael took a step towards her, desperate. "Please, Clara, give me a chance to explain properly, to make things right." She recoiled, stepping away from him as if his touch were poisonous. "No. There's nothing you can say that will change what you did, and there's nothing you can do that will fix this." Clara turned to leave, but Raphael called her back, his voice broken. "What will you do now?" She stopped at the door, without turning. "I'm going to do what I should have done weeks ago. I'm leaving. And this time, it's for good." And with that she left, closing the door behind her with a finality that resonated in Raphael's chest like a funeral bell. He collapsed into his chair, his hands covering his face, and for the second time since the experiment began, he cried. But now these were not tears of relief or general guilt. They were tears of specific loss, the loss of the only person who had remained, the only person who truly cared. And he had lost her through his own stupidity, his own cowardice, his own sick need for control. Albert was right. He had destroyed the only real thing he had in the name of confirming his worst suspicions about human nature, and now he would pay the price. Meanwhile, Clara left the building with quick steps, each step taking her further away from that lie, that pain. She got into her car, drove to her apartment, and as soon as she closed the door behind her, she broke down. She cried with deep sobs that shook her entire body. She cried until she had no more tears, until she felt empty. And then, amidst the pain, she made practical decisions. She deactivated her social media, changed her phone number, blocked all contacts related to Raphael and the company. She needed to disappear. She needed to create a distance that would make it impossible for him to reach her, because she knew that if he managed to talk to her, if she heard his voice, she might falter, and she couldn't allow herself that. She couldn't allow herself to go back to someone who had used her so cruelly. In the following days, Raphael desperately tried to find her. He called her old number and found it deactivated. He sent emails that bounced back as undeliverable. He went to her apartment and found that she wouldn't answer. He tried to contact her friends, but no one knew where she was, or if they did, they weren't telling. Clara had completely disappeared, like smoke in the wind, and Raphael was left alone with the consequences of his actions, alone in an empty building, alone with a company that was never really in danger, alone with the bitter truth that the only true bond he had built was destroyed by his own hands. The experiment was over, but the pain was just beginning. The days after Clara's departure were the darkest in Raphael's life. He continued to go to the office, but there was no purpose in his movements. The empty building that was once just the setting for an experiment now became the perfect reflection of his inner loneliness. He walked through the silent corridors, sat in empty rooms, looked at phones that didn't ring, and he thought of Clara. Always Clara. The first week was denial. Raphael tried to convince himself that she would return, that she just needed time to process, to cool down. He wrote letters that were never sent, rehearsed, speeches that were never delivered. He waited for contact that never came. In the second week came anger. Anger at himself mainly, but also an irrational anger directed at Clara. How could she just disappear? Not even give him a chance to explain himself properly? Not allow him to try to redeem himself? But this anger lasted only a short time. Deep down, Raphael knew she had every right to disappear. He had lost any right to demands when he decided to manipulate her. In the third week, understanding came, and with it the painful acceptance that he had lost something precious. Not just Clara as a person, but the possibility of something real that was beginning to form between them. He had destroyed a future that had barely begun to exist. Albert appeared in his office one rainy January afternoon. Without saying anything, he sat in the chair opposite Raphael's desk and just looked at him with that penetrating gaze that always managed to see through all defenses. "She found out," Raphael said, not as a question, but as a heavy statement. Albert nodded. "I imagined that would happen. How?" "She found documents I should have destroyed." Raphael ran, a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and weariness. "I was going to tell her, I swear I was." "But you didn't. And now? Now she's disappeared, changed her number, blocked everything, vanished completely. And I have no right to look for her. I have no right to anything." Albert was silent for a moment, then spoke with that wisdom that came from decades of experience. Have you thought about what you really want, Raphael? Because there's a difference between wanting to redeem yourself out of guilt and wanting to redeem yourself out of love. Raphael looked up, surprised by the word. Love? Don't play dumb. I saw how you looked at her that night I was here. I saw something in your eyes I'd never seen before. True respect, admiration, and yes, love, even if you didn't have the courage to admit it even to yourself. Raphael remained silent, confronting a truth he had denied for weeks. He loved Clara. He didn't know when it had started, whether it was gradual or sudden, but it was there, a deep feeling that went far beyond respect or gratitude. He loved her, and he had lost her. And if I love her, what does that change? She hates me, and with good reason. Perhaps she's too hurt to distinguish between hatred and pain. Albert stood up. But if you truly love her, you have to give her something you've never given anyone. You have to give her space, you have to let her process, and you have to prove not with words but with actions that you've changed, that you've learned, that she deserved more than you gave. How? Albert smiled slightly. You're a smart man, Raphael. Figure it out. After Albert left, Raphael stood looking out the window, watching the rain fall over London, and began to formulate a plan. Not a plan of manipulation or experiment, but a plan of genuine redemption. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to build a different future. And maybe, just maybe, Clara could be part of that future. But first, he needed to become someone who deserved to be by her side. In the following weeks, Raphael began to put his plan into action. First, he officially ended the bankruptcy experiment. He called a press conference and publicly admitted that everything had been a misguided social test. He took full responsibility, apologized to all affected, and announced that he was creating a compensation fund for employees who had lost time and opportunities because of his charade. The news exploded in the media. Some called him a genius, others a psychopath. Some defended it as a valid scientific experiment, others condemned it as a grave ethical violation. Raphael didn't care about any of the opinions. He did it because it was the right thing to do, because it was the first step to becoming a better person. The second step was more difficult. He sought out every person who had abandoned him during the simulated bankruptcy, not to accuse them, but to apologize. He went to Patricia and admitted he had betrayed her trust. He went to Richard and acknowledged that he put everyone at risk due to his own psychological problems. He called his brother Graham and said that, despite everything, he understood that the financial dependence he himself had created made it impossible for Graham to react differently. Not everyone accepted his apologies. Some slammed the door in his face. Others listened but made it clear that trust had been broken beyond repair. And that was okay. Raphael didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted to take responsibility. The third step was the most important. Raphael decided to create something new, not a company based on hierarchies and power, but an organization focused on empowerment and partnership. He sold Alistair Tech to a group of investors, retaining only a small symbolic stake. With the sale money, he created a fund to support small entrepreneurs, especially those from less privileged communities. And then he started looking for Clara, not to invade her space or force contact, but to prepare something special, something that would show her he had changed, that he had learned. It took almost 2 months, but Raphael finally managed to find out where Clara was. She had moved to Brighton, was working at a social technology startup, and, according to information he discreetly obtained, was rebuilding her life. He didn't make contact. Not yet. First, he needed to finish what he had started. Raphael developed a complete project for a new company, a social consulting firm focused on helping small businesses structure themselves with an emphasis on women-led businesses. And he reserved 50% of the partnership for Clara, not as a favor, not as compensation, but as recognition of her true worth. He created all the legal documentation, established the initial investment, developed the business plan, and then he prepared to do something he had never done before. He prepared to make himself completely vulnerable. It was a Saturday in March when Raphael finally gathered the courage to go to Brighton. He knew where Clara lived through a detective he hired, although the information came at a high cost to his conscience. He knew he was invading her privacy, but he also knew it was the only way to reach her. He parked in front of her building, a modest but well-maintained block in a quiet neighborhood. He sat in the car for almost an hour, gathering courage. What would he say? How would he start? What if she didn't even want to see him? Finally, he got out of the car, picked up the folder with the proposal documents and walked to the intercom. He pressed the button for her apartment with trembling fingers. "Who is it?" Her voice through the intercom made his heart race. "It's me, Clara. Raphael. Please don't hang up. I just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And I'll leave, I promise." There was a long silence, so long that Raphael thought she had hung up. But then the building door emitted an unlatching sound. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs with his heart pounding like a drum. When he reached her apartment, the door was ajar. He pushed it lightly and entered. Clara was in the living room, her back to him, looking out the window. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair tied in a ponytail. She was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "You have 5 minutes," she said without turning. "Start talking." Raphael closed the door behind him and stood there, holding the folder. "First, I want to apologize. Not the empty apologies I gave you that day in the office, but a real apology. I betrayed you. I used you. I played with your feelings to satisfy my own insecurity, and there is no excuse for that. None." Clara still didn't turn. "Continue." "I spent the last few months trying to understand why I did that, and I realized that I was so obsessed with proving that no one truly cared about me that I ended up destroying the only person who genuinely cared. You were real, Clara. Your loyalty was real, your care was real, and I threw that away." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to trust me again, but I want you to know that you changed my life. You showed me what it means to be a genuine person, and I want to be better because of it, not to win you back, but to honor what you represented to me." Clara finally turned. Her face was serene, but there was pain in her eyes. "You drove all the way to Brighton to tell me this?" "Not just that." Raphael placed the folder on the coffee table. "I came to make you a proposal, but before presenting it, I want to make it clear that it's not an attempt to buy your forgiveness. It's not manipulation. It's just a recognition of your worth." Clara looked at the folder, then back at him. "What kind of proposal?" Raphael opened the folder and began to show the documents. "I've created a new company, a social consultancy focused on empowering small entrepreneurs, especially women. And I want you to be my partner. Not my assistant, not my employee, my partner. 50% stake, shared decisions, initial investment already secured." Clara picked up the documents, flipping through them slowly. "Why would I do that? Why would I work with you again after everything that happened?" "Because the project isn't about me. It's about the people we can help. And because despite everything I did, you know I'm good at what I do. And so are you. Together we could do something truly meaningful." She remained silent, reading the documents. Raphael continued. "Also, I've included a fund for your education. There's money set aside for you to take any course you want, any specialization, administration, management, whatever you choose, because you deserve to grow. You deserve to have the tools to be not just my partner, but a leader in your own right." Clara looked up, and for the first time, he saw something beyond pain there. Curiosity, perhaps even hope. "Are you serious?" "Completely. The documents are all here, reviewed by lawyers, all legal, all official. All yours if you want it." She looked at the documents again, her expression shifting through a series of emotions: confusion, distrust, consideration, and finally something that seemed like cautious hope. "I need to think," she said finally. "It's not a decision I can make right now." "I understand." Raphael nodded. "Take all the time you need. The documents are yours, and regardless of your decision about the partnership, the fund for your education is yours anyway. No conditions, no strings attached. Clara looked him in the eyes for the first time since he entered. Why? Why are you doing this? Raphael held her gaze. Because you deserve it. Because I owe you more than I can ever repay. And because, honestly, you are the most incredible person I have ever met. And even if you never want to see me again, even if you choose to go as far away from me as possible, I want you to have all the opportunities you deserve. Clara felt tears threatening to fall but held them back. You hurt me, Raphael. You hurt me in a way I don't know if I can get over. I know. And I will carry that for the rest of my life. He took a step towards the door. But I hope that, one day, you can find peace, and that perhaps you can find a way to forgive me, not for me but for you, because you deserve to live without carrying the weight of the betrayal I placed upon you. He was almost at the door when her voice stopped him. Raphael, he turned. Yes? The 5 minutes are up, but you can stay a little longer. We need to talk for real, about everything. Raphael felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Clara. They sat down, one on each side of the small living room sofa. And then, for the first time, they had a completely honest conversation. Clara spoke about the pain she felt, about the betrayal, about how she had begun to feel something for him, and how that made everything worse. Raphael listened without interrupting, absorbing every word as the penance it was. Then it was his turn. He spoke about his insecurities, about why he created the experiment, about how he regretted it almost immediately, about how he tried to tell the truth, but failed in courage. He admitted that he loved her, even knowing it was a right he had lost. And he said he would understand if she never wanted to see him again. When they finished talking, it was already night. Hours had passed. And although the pain was still there, although the broken trust could not be fixed with a conversation, there was something new too. Understanding. And the possibility, however remote, of a new beginning. Clara said she needed time. Time to think about the proposal, time to process everything, time to decide if she could work with him again. Raphael respected that. He gave her his new phone number, said he would be waiting for her decision, and left. In the following weeks, Clara truly thought a lot. She talked to Beatrice, her best friend, who surprisingly advised caution but not immediate rejection. She talked to her therapist, who helped her process the betrayal, but also to recognize the growth she herself had experienced. And she looked at the proposal documents repeatedly, seeing not only a professional opportunity, but a chance to truly make a difference. But there was still one last test. One last piece needed to fit. It was then that Julian reappeared. Clara was leaving work on a Thursday evening when she saw him. He was leaning against an imported car, his hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit, the confident smile she once found irresistible. Julian, her ex-boyfriend, the man who had broken her heart 2 years earlier. Clara, he said, walking towards her, you look beautiful. She stopped, surprised. Julian, what are you doing here? He smiled, that smile that used to make her heart melt. I came to see you. I came to make you a proposal. Clara crossed her arms, defensive. What kind of proposal? Julian took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. I got an incredible position in Europe, Germany, a huge tech company, excellent salary, incredible benefits, and I want you to come with me. This time the right way. Married, building a life together. Clara took the envelope, looking at the documents inside. A job offer for her at the same company, an employment contract, even an apartment proposal in Berlin. It was everything she had dreamed of years ago, the comfortable life he had refused to give her when he left. But looking at Julian, trying to feel something, Clara realized she felt nothing. No residual resentment, no desire for revenge, no temptation to accept. She had grown. She had changed, and that man in front of her was just a ghost of a past she no longer wanted to relive. Julian, she said gently, returning the envelope. Thank you for the offer, but no. He blinked, surprised. No? Clara, it's everything you've always wanted. A chance in Europe, a good job, a stable life. It was, she agreed. It was what I wanted. But I'm not that person anymore. I grew. I learned that stability and comfort are worth nothing if they come with someone who doesn't truly see me. And you never saw me, Julian. You saw what I could do for you, but you never saw who I truly was. Julian frowned. Is this about that businessman? I heard about him. The scandal. Clara smiled, a kind of quiet pride forming in her chest. It is, and it isn't. It's about me finally learning my own worth. It's about choosing what I want, not what's easiest or safest. And what I want isn't in Europe. It's here, building something that matters. But Clara, she shook her head firm. No, Julian. My answer is no. And it always will be no. You had your chance 2 years ago. And I thank you for that because it forced me to grow, but that door is closed forever. Julian stood there, seemingly speechless, as Clara turned and walked towards her car. And as she drove home, she felt something release within her. The emotional dependence she still carried even without realizing it, the fear of not being enough, the need for external validation. All of that disappeared in that moment. She was enough, alone. And any relationship or partnership she chose to enter would be by choice, not by necessity. That night, Clara picked up the phone and called the number Raphael had given her. He answered on the second ring, his voice filled with surprise and hope. Clara? Hi, Raphael. She took a deep breath. I've decided about the proposal. And I accept with conditions. Raphael felt his heart race. What conditions? First, we're going to therapy, together, as partners, to establish healthy boundaries and learn to trust again. Second, you will give me total autonomy in decisions related to my area, no micromanagement. Third, if at any point I feel you're reverting to old patterns, I leave, and I take my share. No discussion. Raphael took a deep breath, a smile forming on his face. I accept all conditions, and I'll add one more. I want you to have veto power over any important company decision. Your word is worth as much as mine. Always. Clara smiled on the other end of the line. Then we have a deal, partner. We have a deal, partner. In the following months, Clara moved back to London. Not to the same neighborhood, but to a new apartment she chose, partly financed by the fund Raphael had created. She enrolled in an executive MBA, began working on the development of the new company, and slowly began to rebuild a relationship with Raphael. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, discussions about boundaries, flashbacks of the betrayal that still hurt. But they went to therapy, as promised. They worked on their issues individually and as partners, and gradually, week after week, they built something new, not based on hierarchy or power, but on mutual respect and equality. The new company, which they named Roots Social Consultancy, began to take shape. They hired a small team focused on small businesses led by women from underserved communities and began to see real results. Every client who grew, every dream they helped fulfill was a redemption, proof that they could create something good together. And as they worked side by side, something began to change between them again. Not the same chemistry as before, stained by betrayal, but something new, deeper, more real, based on truth, not on illusions. It was love growing again, but this time on solid ground, not quicksand. But before they could explore these renewed feelings, a new threat emerged, a threat that would test if the partnership they had built was strong enough to survive the real world. November arrived, bringing with it renewed energy for Roots Social Consultancy. The company, which had started as a redemption project, was becoming a tangible and transformative reality. They had already helped 15 small businesses structure themselves, all led by women entrepreneurs from communities that rarely had access to professional consulting. Each success story seemed to wash away a little more of the guilt Raphael carried, and each challenge overcome strengthened the partnership between him and Clara. Clara was unrecognizable compared to the silent assistant of months ago. She led meetings with confidence, made strategic decisions with wisdom, and had become a respected voice in the social consulting sector. The MBA she was pursuing had equipped her with theoretical tools that, combined with her natural emotional intelligence, made her a formidable leader. Raphael observed her transformation with a pride that went far beyond the professional. They had moved to their own office, a modest but welcoming space in the Shoreditch neighborhood. Nothing compared to the imposing building of the old Alistair Tech, but it had something that place never had: soul. The walls were decorated with photos of the entrepreneurs they helped. There were plants everywhere, bringing life to the environment. And there was an open space where the team could gather without rigid hierarchies, just people working together for a common purpose. It was a Friday afternoon when the ghost of the past decided to appear. Clara was reviewing a financial report when her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was male, harsh, and immediately familiar in an unpleasant way. Clara Sterling, or should I say, partner in Raphael Alistair's new little charity company. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Who is this?" The man laughed a humorless sound. "You don't remember me, but I remember you very well. I'm Dean Forrester, former IT director at Alistair Tech, one of the many that your dear Raphael deceived with that bankruptcy charade." Clara sat upright, alert. "What do you want, Dean?" "I want justice." Dean spoke with venom in his voice. "That son of a bitch played with our lives, used us like lab rats in his sick experiment, and I'm not going to let it go. He has already publicly apologized. He has already financially compensated all affected. What more do you want? I want the full truth to be known to the world, not the sanitized version he told the press. I want everyone to see the internal documents, the communications, the detailed plans. I want to expose every sordid detail of that experiment." Clara felt her heart race. "And why are you calling me?" "Because I have those documents. I got copies before I left. And I'm going to leak everything to the press tomorrow. Unless what? Unless you pay me to keep quiet. £500,000. Transfer by Monday, otherwise everything leaks, and you can say goodbye to the reputation of your new company." Clara felt anger rise in her throat. "This is extortion. Call it what you want. You have until Monday." And with that, he hung up. Clara sat there, phone still in hand, processing what had just happened. They were being blackmailed, and worse, the threat was real. If detailed documents of the experiment leaked now, at a time when Roots was starting to gain respect, it would be devastating. Clients would lose confidence. The media would have a field day. All the work they had done would be tainted. But there was something more important than all of that. Clara was not going to let someone intimidate or manipulate her. Not again. She had learned her worth, and part of that worth was knowing when to fight. She stood up and went to Raphael's office. He was on the phone with a client, but she entered anyway, her serious expression making him end the call immediately. "What happened?" he asked, reading the tension on her face. Clara told him everything about Dean's call, about the threat, about the extortion. She watched the color drain from Raphael's face as she spoke. When she finished, he ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I knew this could happen. I knew that eventually there would be consequences that money couldn't fix." "What do you want to do?" Clara asked. Raphael looked at her with an expression of defeat. "I'll pay. I'll transfer the money. I can't let this destroy what you've built here." But Clara shook her head firmly. "No, we're not paying." Raphael blinked, surprised. "What? But if he leaks those documents—" "If he leaks them, we deal with it, openly, honestly." Clara sat on the edge of his desk. "Raphael, you've already publicly admitted what you did. You've already apologized. You've already compensated people. If we give in to blackmail now, there will be no end. He'll come back. Others will appear. We'll spend our lives hostage to the past. But the company? The company will survive because it's built on something real. On real work, on real help, on real transformation. If people condemn us because of the past, then perhaps they weren't the right clients for us anyway." Raphael looked at her with growing admiration. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded. "I am. And what's more, I'll handle it." How? She smiled, that determined smile. He had learned to recognize as a prelude to something brilliant. I have a plan. In the following hours, Clara put her plan into action. First, she called the cybersecurity team the company kept on retainer. She explained the situation and asked them to track Dean and identify exactly which documents he had. In parallel, she contacted a lawyer specializing in digital crimes and extortion. And then she made the boldest decision. She called Dean back herself. Dean answered on the third ring, his voice filled with arrogant confidence. "Do you have the money yet?" "No," Clara said calmly, "and we're not paying." There was a surprised pause. "Excuse me? You heard me correctly. We're not paying. And what's more, I've already alerted the police. Extortion is a crime, Dean. You are committing a federal crime." His voice became tense. "You're bluffing." "I'm not. And our security team is already tracking you. We already know you accessed those documents illegally, violating your confidentiality agreement. You have two options now. Either you hand over those documents and cooperate with the authorities and maybe you can get a deal, or you try to leak everything and face the full legal consequences." "You can't do that." Clara smiled, even knowing he couldn't see it. "I can and I am, and you know why? Because I learned that you don't negotiate with people who try to manipulate you. You confront them, you fight, you don't bow down." Dean began to babble threats, but Clara hung up. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she felt stronger than ever. She was no longer the assistant who silently accepted everything. She was a leader, and leaders protect what is theirs. Raphael had watched everything from the doorway, his eyes wide. When she hung up, he entered the room and simply embraced her. It was a tight hug filled with gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. "You're incredible," he whispered. Clara returned the hug, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "I learned from the best. I learned about strategy from you, and I learned about courage from myself." They remained like that for a long moment, two human beings who had gone through so much together and apart, now united not by manipulation or hierarchy, but by genuine respect. In the following days, Clara's plan unfolded perfectly. The security team tracked Dean and discovered he was operating from an internet cafe, trying to hide his location. The lawyer filed a legal action, and the police opened an investigation. Confronted with the evidence and the possibility of criminal charges, Dean conceded. He handed over the documents, signed an enhanced non-disclosure agreement, and disappeared, his attempt at blackmail ending in humiliation. But more important than defeating Dean was what that episode revealed. Clara was no longer the person who needed to be protected or saved. She was the protector. She was the fighter. She was the leader who had emerged from the ashes of her own pain and transformed into something formidable. Raphael saw it, the whole team saw it, and Clara finally saw it too. A few weeks later, as the company continued to grow and new projects emerged, Raphael realized something fundamental. He was completely in love with Clara. It was no longer a distant admiration or a nascent feeling. It was full, mature, real love. He loved her not only for what she had become, but for who she had always been. For the woman who had the courage to stay when everyone else left. For the woman who had the courage to leave when betrayed. And for the woman who had the courage to return, not out of necessity but by choice. But how to tell her? How to express such deep feelings without seeming like he was trying to manipulate again? Albert, who had become a regular advisor to both, gave the simplest advice when Raphael shared his doubts. Be honest, be vulnerable, and let her decide. That's all you can do. So Raphael decided he would do something special. Not a grand, calculated gesture, but something simple and sincere. He would invite her to dinner. A real dinner, not a disguised business meeting. And he would tell her exactly how he felt. It was the second week of December, almost a full year since that devastating Christmas when everything had fallen apart. Raphael chose a small restaurant in Notting Hill, intimate but not pretentious, and he invited Clara with a sincerity that caught her by surprise. "Is it a date?" she asked, playfully, but with a touch of nervousness. "It is," he admitted. "A real date, if you want." Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. I want to. On the night of the dinner, Raphael dressed carefully. Not the impeccable corporate suit from before, but something more casual, more him. A light blue button-down shirt, chinos, a light blazer. He was nervous in a way he hadn't felt in decades. Not business nervousness, but teenage nervousness going on a first date. When he arrived at Clara's apartment to pick her up, he almost lost his breath. She wore a green dress that accentuated her eyes, her hair loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, light makeup that highlighted her natural beauty. She was radiant. "You look beautiful," he said, and the words came out more emotional than he intended. "Thank you," she replied, a blush rising on her cheeks. "You look very good too." They drove to the restaurant making light conversation, but there was a current of tension in the air. Not a bad tension, but the electric anticipation of something important about to happen. The restaurant was cozy, with soft lighting and instrumental music playing softly. They were led to a table in a reserved corner, perfect for an intimate conversation. They ordered food almost without looking at the menu, too busy looking at each other. During dinner, they talked about everything and nothing, about the company, about the clients, about their dreams for the future. But there was something unsaid hanging between them, a confession waiting to be made. It was during dessert that Raphael finally gathered courage. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She put her fork down, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." Raphael took a deep breath. "I know I have no right to ask anything more of you. I know I've already been given more chances than I deserved, but I need to be honest about something." He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm in love with you." Clara felt her heart race but said nothing, letting him continue. "It's not a new or superficial love. It's something that grew slowly, day after day, seeing who you truly are, working with you, seeing you transform into the incredible leader you always were inside. And I'm not telling you this to pressure you to feel the same. I'm saying it because you deserve to know. Because honesty is the least I can give you now." Clara felt tears threatening to fall. She had built walls around her heart since the betrayal. She had promised herself not to become vulnerable again. But looking at Raphael now, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, feeling the truth in his words, she realized something important. The walls didn't protect her. They only isolated her. "I'm in love with you too," she said softly. Raphael felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "Seriously?" She nodded, tears finally streaming. "I fought against it for months. After everything that happened, I swore I would never let you near my heart again. But you changed, Raphael, you really changed. And I changed too. And maybe, just maybe, we can build something new, not based on the past but on the present, on who we are now." Raphael reached across the table, and Clara took his hand. The touch was simple, but full of meaning. Unspoken promises, shared hopes, a possible future. They finished dinner in a state of silent ecstasy, each still processing the other's confession. Raphael drove her back home, and at her apartment door he kissed her. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of respect and contained desire. A kiss that sealed a new beginning. In the following weeks, Raphael and Clara officially began dating. They maintained professionalism at work, but outside the office they allowed themselves to explore this new dimension of their relationship. Dinners, walks, long conversations that stretched into the early hours, and slowly the walls they had both built began to fall, revealing two deeply in love people, committed not only to each other, but to their own growth. Christmas was approaching again. A full year since that devastating night in the empty building. But now everything was different. Root Social Consultancy was thriving. Clara had graduated from her MBA with honors. Raphael had become not only a better businessman, but a better man. And together they had built something real. Raphael planned something special for Christmas Eve. Not a grand event or extravagant gesture. Just a dinner in his new apartment, a more modest place than his old penthouse, but much more welcoming. He cooked, something he had learned in recent months as part of his commitment to being more self-aware. And he set the table with candles, flowers, and all the care he could muster. Clara arrived wearing a red dress, radiant with happiness. They had dinner laughing, sharing stories of the crazy year they had passed. And when they finished, Raphael led her to the balcony, where the city lights shone like fallen stars. "Clara," he began, taking her hand, "this year was the hardest and the best of my life. Hard because I faced the consequences of my own failures. Best because I truly found you, because I learned what it means to love unconditionally, because you showed me that redemption is possible." Clara smiled, squeezing his hand. "You showed me that I could also grow, that I could be strong, that I could lead." Raphael took a deep breath, feeling the small ring in his pocket. He had planned this moment carefully, but then, exactly when he was about to speak, all the city lights suddenly went out. A blackout. For a few seconds, they were in complete darkness. Then their eyes adjusted, and they saw the emergency lights of some buildings, the moon shining softly above. And somehow, that unplanned interruption made the moment even more perfect. Raphael grabbed a flashlight he kept on the balcony for emergencies and turned it on, creating a small circle of light between them. And there, under the starry London sky, with the city blacked out, around them he knelt. Clara brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Clara Sterling," Raphael said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. You showed me what it means to stay when all seems lost. You taught me about courage, about character, about true love. And I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." He opened the small box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Clara was crying, but they were tears of pure joy. She knelt beside him, cupping his face with her hands. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They kissed under the stars, two human beings who had passed through darkness and found light in each other. And when the city lights finally came back on, minutes later, it was as if the universe was celebrating with them. The following months were a whirlwind of happiness. They set the wedding for the next summer. Clara continued to lead projects at Roots, now with even more confidence. Raphael continued to learn to be not only a better businessman, but a better partner. And together, they continued transforming lives, including their own. There were challenges, of course, discussions about the wedding, about the future, about how to balance personal and professional life. But each challenge was faced together, with the certainty that what they had was strong enough to survive any storm. And every Christmas, they made a point of celebrating not just the date, but the anniversary of their transformation. Because it was on one Christmas, so many years ago, that everything had fallen apart. And it was on another Christmas that everything was rebuilt. They called it their Christmas of Redemption. At these annual celebrations, they invited all the entrepreneurs they had helped, all the people whose lives they had touched, and they shared stories, laughter, hopes. It was a reminder that even from the darkest ashes, something beautiful can grow. On one of these Christmases, 5 years after their wedding, as they watched children playing in their garden, surrounded by friends and family, Clara turned to Raphael with a smile. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. Raphael thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "I regret hurting you. I regret the experiment. But I don't regret where it led us, because without that darkness, perhaps we would never have fully appreciated this light." Clara nodded, agreeing. "Sometimes I think we need to be broken to be rebuilt the right way." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, for giving me the chance to be the man you always deserved. Thank you for showing me that I could be strong, that I always was strong." They stayed like that, embraced, watching the sun set over London, knowing that they had found something many spend their whole lives searching for without ever finding. They had found redemption. They had found true love. They had found themselves. And when night fell and the stars appeared, Raphael and Clara entered their home, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future brought, because together they were invincible. Not because they were perfect, but because they had learned that true strength comes from getting up after falling. It comes from forgiving when it's impossible. It comes from loving when it's scary. And above all, it comes from choosing to stay, not when it's easy, but when it's difficult. Because in the end, what truly matters is not what you have or what you lost. It's who you choose to be when you face the darkness, and who you choose to have by your side when the light finally returns. And Raphael and Clara had chosen right. They had chosen each other. And that choice, made and remade every day, was all they needed to build an extraordinary life from a devastating beginning. Because the best stories are not those that start perfect. They are those that find beauty in chaos, redemption in the fall, and love in the last person you would expect to find. This is the story of Raphael and Clara, a story of failure and redemption, of betrayal and forgiveness, of loneliness and love, a story that proves it's never too late to start over, to be better, to truly love. And as they looked to the future together, they knew this was not just a happy ending story. It was a story of possible beginnings, of second chances seized, of love earned, not given, and it would continue to be written, page by page, day after day, forever. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Raphael and Clara has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, loyalty, and true love, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what touched you most. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a new beginning. We await you in the next episode, with more stories that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the power of choices, forgiveness, and transformation. Until next time.